introduction to PLOS, for those of you who are not familiar. It's a nonprofit organization, and it basically its mission is to accelerate progress in science and medicine, in the life sciences, and the idea is to keep everything open access. So it was really founded because digital technology changed the way publication occurs and the access to publication. It created a new business model, and enabling open access is very powerful with respect to getting the information out. In addition, the author retains all of the rights and the copyright, and the data will automatically get put into PubMed Central. So it's a very good way to disseminate information. All right, so to just plunge into the writing. So whenever you pick a journal, you should actually think about the scope of the journal that you're going to publish in. You know, not every study is suited to every journal. And the other thing I would say here is don't take it as a personal insult. If you actually find that your study is suited to a journal whose readership level might actually be lower than what you had aspired to. In general, you know, for most people, especially if you're publishing early papers, focus on publishing good work. That is also another great advantage of digital technology. Your work will be read if it is good. So pick and choose. Don't publish everything in your lab notebook. It is really not necessary to do that. And in general, you have a much better paper if you tell a narrative. And more importantly, if you tell a narrative that the field wants to hear. You know, it is really good to be able to position yourself in that way. And to sort of get, and really this is key, that to get a sense of the bar for a journal, you should read recent work in the journal. And the bar does move as more is added to the literature. This is actually, you know, not something that you get done in the course of a day or two. To get a sense of what a variety of different journals are, levels they're publishing at, and the kinds of things they publish, it will probably, you know, take a few weeks of, you know, kind of perusing, I would say maybe half a dozen journals. So I'm going to give you the examples in the context of pathogens, but I appreciate that not all of you work on pathogens, but it really applies to any journal that you would be publishing work. So here, you know, we are interested in looking at really pretty fundamental principles in microbiology, and we are run as independent sections. If you have a journal that you're interested in that is run at independent sections, you should take a good hard look as to who the section editors are of that journal. Because they very much reflect the expertise of the journal, and you don't want to send your paper to a journal where the expertise isn't there to review it. That's, you know, putting one foot in the grave if you send it to a journal where you don't have the editorial expertise. So this is an important feature with respect to submitting to us. And then hopefully every journal that you're interested in publishing in will have rigorous peer-reviewed research articles. And then the criteria here is substantial evidence for conclusion. And this is a little hard to actually put into concrete terms. And it's not bad to get in touch with an editor. Just write an editor. Academic editors are very accessible. And our broad mandate in pathogens is that it should actually be of significance across pathogens, across all pathogens. And either you've got to have some mechanistic insight that is unique, or you've got to have something with respect to disease or disease pathology that is unique. But that's pretty broad. So if you want more specific information, I would, again, look at that editorial board and see whether you can get, some insight from them. So, right, more on the scope of pathogens, but, again, I'm not going to dwell on this for very long. The slides actually will be available. I'm not sure who I'm going to give it to, but they're posted on the pathogens website, so you can download them, use them in any way you want. Just make sure that you credit the source. That is also a great advantage of the PLOS model. So we are, and I think you are, as a group, very committed to basic research. We know all about the virtues of basic research, even how it is an engine for translational research, but I will not dwell on this. Generally, you are part of a diverse community. You can also take a look at other features that a journal will have. For instance, Pathogens has what's called a Pearl series and other component series to get a sense of what kinds of things a journal will accept. So you should, for any journal, be able to get very current information on the editorial board expertise. So most journals will have tiered editorial structures. At Pathogens, in terms of the tier, the editors-in-chief, and then you have the section editors, and then you have the associate editors. The associate editors actually make the decision because they send out to the reviewers. The associate editors are empowered to make the decision. The reviewers, we do not ask reviewers whether they think a paper should be accepted or not accepted to PLOS Pathogens. We actually just ask them for what they think of the paper. They often provide unsolicited advice on whether the paper should be accepted or not accepted. That is the part of the review we actually delete. But other than that, you get unfiltered review back, and the associate editor gives you a decision statement. If the process works well, then what the associate editor says is very much reflected in the reviews. But we pride ourselves, and I think on the whole it works pretty well. We always provide a reason for why your paper was not accepted, as opposed to, sorry, we got too many papers this week. I think we know some journals that respond that way. And yours was a lovely paper, but it was just 101, and we're just only handling 99. So we will never tell you that. Okay. So now to the business of kind of the actual writing. You should understand the bar, and again, this is in the context of pathogens, but really, I think for most of the papers that you would want to be submitting to journals with wide readership, all of these criteria apply. Originality, the importance to researchers in the field, the broad interest to the larger field, rigorous methodology, and substantial evidence for conclusions. So when you've done the research, you make sure that your results can be successfully published. But this is a little bit of a misleading statement because you can avoid rejection letters in lots of different ways. One of the ways, of course, is you can start very early in the game, so not after you've done the work. Anyway, I think this is an effort at humor. This is a letter. PLOS likes to use this letter a lot. We'd like to publish your paper. Your paper is good and original, but the trouble is the good bits were not original and the original bits were not good. So you should try to bring those two things together. And it's very hard not to take that personally. So don't let anybody tell you don't take it personally. By all means, take it personally. But then when you respond or you try to revise your paper, do it after you've cooled off, And so how to kind of get past this is You want to sell yourself, you want to capture the editor's attention, you want to have a structure. Without a clear structure, you will not really be able to get too far, and you want effective writing. So there are these what, where, and how. You want to think about your message. You want a single take-home message, all right? That is really the best thing to do. Having said that, we just published a paper in Blood that has 2 take-home messages. So these are guidelines. If you can have one message, it's not because your work on 2 messages is not important, it's because one message is easier to understand. You also have to convince them of their importance, and then make sure that your results support your message. That sometimes gets lost. Okay, think about who is going to read the paper. Who do you want to have read the paper? And that's how you choose the journal. Think about what the audience already knows about the topic and what will they want to know. And then, of course, make sure you're in the scope of the journal. Okay, every journal has author guidelines and style guidelines. These are the kinds of styles that you have to fulfill for specific types of studies. And then you go through technical checks, editor assignment, internal editorial review. Okay, and that's what I meant about sort of the tier of section editors and then associate editors. So in general, certainly at Pathogens, the section editors first get your paper, and they do an internal consult, which is not supposed to take any more than a week, to decide whether the paper is off the scope of the journal and whether it'll go to an associate editor for peer review. The associate editor actually also looks at it to make the decision whether it should go out for peer review. Once it goes out for peer review, then you go through the full process. So again, for a journal, if things go well, you should, or at least work smoothly, within a week you should know whether your paper is going out to peer review or not. So if that doesn't happen, you should check. So again, this is what happens in the first step and how to get through the editorial triage. What a section editor is looking for and a section editor's consult is about is not necessarily did you do the method completely correctly, because they may not actually have that expertise. They are looking for the broad message. They're looking for the impact. They're looking for, is this of interest? So you've got to sell yourself through these steps. You can do a pre-submission inquiry if you really don't know what the scope of the journal is. It will get evaluated on the basis of your abstract. Since your abstract, should be kind of the last thing you're writing on your paper, sometimes it's just as well to submit the manuscript itself. It's not uncommon when you send a pre-sub inquiry that you get a response back that says, we can't tell. So, doesn't really get you. But let's focus on this. What matters to an editor? Because I think this is really where the key steps are, and then we can break into a discussion after that. Okay, the abstract. Many journals now base their decisions on the abstract alone. I mean, I'd like to think that at Pathogens that's not the case, but we are a community of editors, and I honestly don't know what those HIV people do, and I don't tell them how to run HIV or virology. So you should really, because they are going to read the abstract, and if the abstract does not interest them, that paper will not move forward. That is a given. It should be standalone, accurate, and represent what you've done in the study. So, if you do an abstract, if you do a well-structured abstract, it can actually be really valuable, even for a study that hasn't really panned out the way you thought it was going to. I mean, presumably all of us launch on projects because we think they're really exciting and wonderful, and why would you launch on something that's boring, right? But then, as you do the work, you actually find out, and this is an example that I've taken because it's a really good example and a rare example of a study that actually came out, was submitted to PLOS NTDs. And what they actually started looking at was whether the genetic heterogeneity of two vector populations that transmit sleeping sickness can provide an explanation for distribution of trypanosoma parasites that are seen in a particular area. And so they examined the genetic structuring of these populations across Uganda, developed markers, et cetera, and they looked for whether there were two clearly defined clusters that are separated by this physical boundary. So what they found, actually, that they didn't find any correlation between the genetic heterogeneity and the type of trypanosome parasite species. And most of us, if we actually got that result, you would sort of say, this is not very exciting. But the conclusion is actually really well written. It says the lack of a correlation between genetic structuring of GF fucipes populations and the distribution of Gambi and Redenziensi indicates that it is unlikely that genetic heterogeneity of these populations explains the disjunct distribution of the parasites, and these results have important epidemiological implications suggesting a fusion of these two disease distributions is unlikely to be prevented. It actually is intellectually really strong. And so the intellectual quality and the language that you use is very important to convincing an editor that this is a well-done study and that something can be learned from a negative result. Yeah? So I'm sorry it's not in cell biology, but most people are not able to pull this off, I'll tell you that. But it's impressive that they're able to do. Okay, so without going into the specifics of the details of the poor abstract, this is a well-written abstract. And I think what you will see if you peruse these slides is a lot shorter than your poor abstract. Okay? Brevity is important. Try to think about, you possibly start out here when you write this abstract, which is extremely descriptive. But what you want to do is try to move in this domain. So your abstract matters a lot. You should spend a lot of time thinking about the abstract and writing it. Okay, so writing tips. You can look at search engines for information. And when anything you do, you realize anybody else should do. So whatever you have in terms of your abstract or your title, they should be things that can be found by search engines. And make that also the case for keyword phrases. So if you can integrate information in your title, abstract, and keyword phrases, you'll be doing well in terms of reinforcing what your paper is about. So other things that editors look at. The title. The title matters. Now, I know this is actually, kind of stating the obvious, but you have to strike a balance between enticing the reader, do not give away the punchline, and do not over-sensationalize, okay? You don't do yourself any favor by over-sensationalizing. Most editors really are not particularly happy about that. If you want to over-sensationalize your paper, you should do that in the more public domain, in the USA Today type of thing, if you have the equivalent of a USA Today, as opposed to, the scientific journal. So if you like to sensationalize, just save it for later. Sometimes you will actually have a portion that is required on study design. Okay, since titles are shorter, this is an example of a bad title. Temporary depletion of complement component C3 or genetic deficiency significantly delays onset of scrapie, as opposed to complement facilitates early prion pathogenesis. You know, if you actually disagree, we should talk about this. But I think, you know, often enough you are forced into this because there's a character limit on titles. Yeah. So, and this bad to good refinement from bad title to good title, you know, you're better off doing it really as the last task of your paper. You need a title to kind of circulate your paper to all your collaborators and whatever else, you know. But, and you also, you know, the actual writing of a paper teaches you a lot about your study, if you're anything like me. I mean, I was just like, oh, yeah, we showed that. You know, where the sum is really, you know, the whole is really greater than the sum of the parts. And so it's very good if you can communicate that whole in your title. And so, you know, the advice would be really to try and do this at the end of writing the paper. But it is really important. So the third thing at what an editor looks like is the cover letter. Yes. The cover letter is really important. And I cannot tell you how many times we see this sentence. Please consider this manuscript for publication in your esteemed journal. Now, it's very nice to have flattery, but why on earth would you be submitting anything to us if you were not considering it for publication? You know, really do not state the obvious. You know, you could start off to any editor by saying, dear so-and-so, I think this paper is suitable for publication in your journal for the following reasons. Okay, that's a much better start off. And then you want to tell the editor why they should take your work seriously. So those are kind of, you know, the three key components. So I don't know how we're doing for time. We have 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to take 3 minutes to ask somebody in the audience to recapitulate for me what are the three important things. And you may not answer, Lali.
But I do want to add something.
All right. So Dr. Ramakrishnan here wants to add something. But first we're going to take a question.
Yes.
Okay, somebody in the back, tell us. What are the three components? It can be a group of people. Okay, whoever gets the mic first, go for it.
The abstract,
Yeah.
title, and
cover
the
letter.
cover letter.
Okay, yeah, okay. Because really, no matter how great your study is, it's very hard to get past that first round if you don't have the three together. So Dr. Lalitha Ramakrishnan from the University of Cambridge has something to add.
I am also an associate editor at PLOS Pathogens.
Yeah.
I should tell you that I learned how to write grants from Kasturi. And I've been pretty successful since she told me how to do them, and I'm quite serious about that. So it's great to have somebody who can help you. But I agree with everything that Kasturi said, and the one thing that we do slightly differently is I have my students write a title and abstract first, and then go back to it at the end now that we've written the paper, and then revise it. And the reason we do it this way is because of the very things that Kasturi was saying. Why is your paper important? What's the key message? And if you get that in first, and then you will find that it will change considerably after, but it at least helps you to kind of get a grasp on writing the rest of the paper, and that's all I have to say.
Yeah. No, I mean, you need something to hold the paper together as it's, you know, evolving. And actually, this is really true as work gets more and more collaborative, and, you know, you're sending the paper off to multiple authors, and sometimes, you know, outside of your lab, and sometimes those people have only been involved in one part of it, and they actually only want to deal with one part of it. But still, they are much better at helping you with the data on that part of it if they understand what the larger study is about. You know, they don't really need the word-polished title, but they need something. But then, you go back and you rework it. So, okay, that's great. So we have several people who put their hands up. Are there any questions at this point? Because most of what the rest I have to say is more specifics on some of the other parts, which I think most people probably have a better grasp on. Are there any questions about the other? Yeah, go ahead.
Since you mentioned about the starting early.
Actually, can you say who you are?
I am Pallavi. I am doing PhD from University of Hyderabad.
Okay.
So since you mentioned about
In what?
In biochemistry.
But what in biochemistry?
So we look at the nuclear dynamics, the organization of nucleus, and the interorganular communication in yeast.
Okay, cool.
So since you mentioned about starting early, so I wanted to know, is it okay to not have a complete story and submit your paper for a pre-submission?
Yeah, no, actually what I would say is that you should start thinking about what journal, when you actually have like a key result. You know how you can work on a project and then you suddenly get a result and you're like, oh wow, yeah, this is definitely going to be written up. And this is definitely going to be a key. I would say at that point, start thinking, oh, where do I want to send this? Because the level of proof that you provide in a paper and also the level of proof that is possible in your system will determine very much, what journal you're going to send to. So I would say, it's not what most of us do, to tell you the truth, because we often kind of instinctively think, oh yeah, we know what level this is at, and we try to see whether you can take it to a higher level, etc. But as early as possible. And pre-subs you get very quick answers to. The problem with pre-subs is that the advice that you get, it can only be as informed as the amount of information that the editor is getting. So a lot of the time for a pre-subs are very good to find out that you don't belong to the journal. Pre-subs are not very good to get a nuanced response back from the journal. You see what I mean? Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Renu Pandey and I am from Ambedkar Center for Biomedical Research, University of Delhi. And we work on deciphering the role of ROS in autophagy and longevity, the background of certain mutations. Now my question, ma'am, is that once we are done with, say, supposedly a cover letter, abstract and stuff, what do you suggest about a good structured discussion? How do you get about writing a very well structured discussion? How long should it be? And what should be the critical points that one should include while writing discussions of the paper?
Yeah, so I actually have some slides on that. We will definitely discuss that. So that's great. Thank you for raising that question.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah? Anything? Yeah.
I'm Shankar, I work at CCMB. My question is with respect to the preprint server.
Speak into your mic.
Yeah. My question is with respect to the preprint servers. I know that PLOS Biology or PLOS completely accepts, publishing your paper as a preprint. Okay. Now, assuming that a paper is sitting in a preprint server for, say, a year or so, and it's very likely that people know that it has gone for a pilgrimage, how do editors look at that?
Yeah, so the question, if you didn't hear it in the back of the room, was that, you have preprint servers now, and PLOS really promotes preprint servers. And so now you've got, a paper that, and PLOS actually offers to put your manuscript that you've submitted into a preprint server for you, even though you didn't actually originally select that. But now the review process, can take a while, and your manuscript could be in review for like a year, hopefully not a year, but we keep an eye on time, But so PLOS's position actually is that we do not even penalize if somebody comes in with a new manuscript and some paper has just appeared. Actually, I think it's within 3 months or 5-6 months in the literature, and even if that paper could be perceived as to be very close or almost identical, you do not get penalized. The reason being, I mean, there are really two perspectives that are supported by this position. The first is, the second paper on a topic in the field is not a paper too many, right? Often it might have the same overall message, but the validation has been done in a different way. That is incredibly valuable to a field. The only thing we don't want to do is, we don't want, essentially, we don't want people to plagiarize on other people's work, right? But, if you've undertaken a study that has taken, 3 years to finish or 4 years to finish, just because somebody else got to it, 2 months before you did, no, you're absolutely not, you're not even penalized at the time of submission. So the answer is that, I mean, with respect to preprint servers, you are not penalized at all. There's no penalty.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Manish. I'm a PhD student in CCMB. I work on HCV biology, hepatitis C virus biology. So what is the key to choose the editor of your choice, and how important is this for the acceptance or rejection?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. And actually, I'll start on the other end. And the other end is, if you look on our editorial, sorry, go ahead.
If I can complete my question,
sorry.
And do editors also look if the lab have previously published something of the same impact factor, or anything is like that? Okay,
I'm going to try and address it I will address all parts of your question, but not in the order that you raised it. So the first is, for any journal, and certainly for pathogens, if you look on the editorial board and you think, I really don't want any of those people handling my paper, I would say that is a very good message to you not to send your paper to that journal. It is a huge burden to a journal if you write to them and say, I would really like to publish in your journal, but every editor you have cannot, or 90% of the editors you have, I really don't want them to see my paper, There are enough mechanisms of publication that you should feel that the editor, there may be 1 or 2 editors. Virology is a very big section. So there might be 1 or 2 editors, who you want to exclude. If you actually ask for an editor to be excluded, they will be excluded. So that is completely honored. If you want an editor to be included, there is an internal check that is passed on to the editor about whether there is any conflict of interest and whether there has been any prior discussion with the editor, and whether the editor feels, we don't really want a process where an editor has provided you with a substantial amount of input, because we do encourage people to contact editors. But if an editor has provided you with a substantial amount of input on how to improve your paper, and then if they are the ones who are handling your paper, that part we don't want. Is that clear? And so, no, we do not look to see whether somebody has published with us or not. By the Committee on Publication Ethics Guidelines, we are not allowed to make decisions on the basis of anything other than an individual paper. Every paper has to be judged on its own merit.
Hello, ma'am. I'm Dr. Uma Maheshwari.
Yeah.
I'm Dr. Uma Maheshwari from University of Mysore. We are working on probiotic isolates in treating candidiasis. Especially when we come with microbiology, we talk about the epidemiology, distribution, drug resistance. And as you mentioned, the title should be concise. Should we add on the part like this sort of distribution is seen in South India or this region? In the title, should we add up or not?
Well, I think, the question is your title does need to be pretty focused. And so that decision is hard to make. If you think South India is important, then, it should be in there. But, if not, then not. Yeah. So, okay, so I just got a message that we have only 10 minutes. So I'm going to try and address the question. I think we have to hold. What? It has to be real quick.
Okay.
A very short.
Yes.
Want to stand up?
Yeah, sure. Hello, ma'am. So I work on the role of microRNAs in medulloblastoma pathogenesis, which is a childhood brain tumor. So recently I communicated, but one of the comments from one of the reviewers was that although the study is interesting, the authors seem to lack enthusiasm. So I really did not get how to show more enthusiasm.
So I would say, I don't think we need to worry about that comment. It's a poor comment. I mean,
no,
the editorial
because there are other people working on the same field. So do they mean I have to criticize their work, or if I am contradicting some of their work or some of their data, should I focus on the criticism part more?
No, I would say that I do not understand that comment, and I would disregard it. It is not a reasonable comment. And you might point it out to the editor. That's all I would do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just try and go on to the question on structure. So I'm going to skip through a lot of slides. We have 100 slides here. Nobody wants to see them all. So structure. So readers should know throughout the piece, where they've come from, where they are now, and where they are heading, because continuity is important. Generally, the abstract page, the structure is pretty well laid out. Oops. And then usually you will have these sorts of discussions. The introduction, generally you should keep it short. Do not write a literature review. That's the one thing that happens in the introduction. And try to get the reader directed to the issue. Again, these are more details on the introduction tips, and you can peruse it. And they are all really about get to the issue, keep it brief, and provide information on the importance of the research question. More details on the introduction. Okay, methods. So once your paper goes to, the reviewer, there is going to be very detailed information required with respect to your method. And so I think we all know that a qualified reader should be able to repeat your study. That's probably, the nub of it. With quantitative studies, there now are requirements and bars. And actually, the last bit on ethics, informed consent and IRB approval, different journals vary, but actually more and more, if your consent and approval information is not provided, your paper will not be reviewed. And this is not just in PLOS journals. It's now across the board. So you should make sure that for both IRB approval and also for ACUC approval, which is animal studies approval, that you actually have the appropriate documentation. So the study design is actually very important, and I think for most of our studies, we tend not to have that much retrospective analysis, but if you do, you should put that in, and then this business of controlled, uncontrolled, and just very specific information on how you've done randomization, because these are very important components of the design of the study. It actually helps the editor understand whether the study was designed well, which again moves your paper along a lot faster. All the issues of biological samples, I think here again, sample size, participants, was it representative, how did you reduce bias, inclusion, exclusion, and then your outcomes measures. So this is very important because, again, an editor might not be an expert on a validated tool in your particular viral system, but they know about validated tools in other viral systems, right? So you've got to give it to them so they can understand it. Statistical methods, research ethics considerations, and so this is really important because you will not move past the very first level. So you will not even get reviewed for academic work. Qualitative, quantitative analyses, that is also something that you need to pay attention to. Figures and tables, really every figure should have one message, every table should have one message. Each should be able to stand on its own. And in general, do not discuss your findings in the figure legends. This is especially relevant for PLOS papers because we don't actually have very strict limits on the number of words and things like that. So it's less relevant in other journals. So here's an a description of kind of how you would want to lay out your figures. There's a detailed discussion later on kind of on specifics of figure manipulation. All right. So pretty much all journals put anything that's a photograph or was a photograph at some point or a digital image. You can tell my age that I talk about photographs. Will be put through an image analyzer. It's just not possible to do it otherwise. So you should be aware of that. And then these are, kind of very straightforward guidelines that I'm sure you do, but, take a look and make sure that you do it. Okay. We come to the discussion. So the discussion is where, you want to actually be able to expound, and I think that was the question, sort of how do you structure the discussion? So you actually don't, just in the same way that you don't want the introduction to be a review of the entire literature, but more a digest of it, you don't want your discussion to go too far from what you found. And so if you have structured your results section well, a very simple rule to writing the discussion is write it in the order of your results section, Then you may decide, depending on the readership of the journal, all right, that you want to move it around because the readership of the journal, if you study host pathogen interactions, for instance, right, you can send it to a journal where the readership is more oriented to the host, or you can send it to a journal where the readership is more oriented to the pathogen. And so that's when, after you write your discussion in the structure, in the same order as your results, you look at it and then you say, no, this particular audience is probably more interested in my findings of what this means for the host. So move that around. But you have to make it work. So these are guidelines. You definitely should discuss the strengths and the weaknesses. Sometimes a strength and weakness sentence also gets put into the results. Don't repeat yourself, but discussions are where you can be. Yeah, so then you relate your study to what has already been found. You discuss what your study means, and you do unanswered questions. What is the future? All right, so I'm sorry that we didn't actually get, the additional time. I'm happy to answer questions. Email is like the easiest way, to reach me. And, but as I said, the slides are available on the website, and there's a lot of them. So, I would suggest working through those details, and then, and I encourage you all to submit to open access, and especially PLOS and PLOS Pathogens. Oh, okay, yeah. If there are any additional questions, I'm happy to take them. Two questions. Okay, there's a question here.
Yeah. Myself, Upen Soni from the Central Drug Research Institute, Lucknow. So I am working on the female reproductive disorder, that is the endometriosis. So I have a small question. When multiple reviewers have reviewed any manuscript, so before displaying the comments...
Can you speak into your mic?
Yeah. Before displaying the comments to the author, does editor also check the reviewer comments, as he has mentioned that there was no enthusiasm and you replied that that was the poor comment. So does editor also review the reviewer comments before displaying to the author?
Oh yeah, no, the editor should have reviewed the review comments, but the editors, in general, a journal will not edit review comments. You can imagine, it would be mayhem. It would not be independent review. So a journal But what an editor is allowed to do is an editor is allowed to disagree with a reviewer.
Okay.
Yeah, so the editorial letter is the decision. You know, and very often the editorial letter will say, you should address these points and then consider resubmission. I mean, they're allowed to do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.